Today I'll be going over Chapter 9 of Alanna Nash's book, The Colonel. Chapter 9 is titled Nashville's Nasal, Whine, Jamup&Honey, Eddie Arnold, and Hank Snow. Nash says Parker's work at the Humane Society eventually overlapped with the next stage of his career, promoting country music shows. That path would move him beyond Florida and eventually toward Nashville, booking Grand Ole Opry stars. He started promoting country music shows in 1941, mainly as a way to raise money for the Humane Society. At first, he didn't really understand or even prefer country music. He liked Gene Austin's sentimental crooning much more than the nasal Nashville sound. But he realized country music appealed strongly to ordinary working people in Florida, especially farmers and the working class who idolized Grand Ole Opry stars. So he and two partners rented the large Fort Homer W. Hesterly Armory for a show, with a small portion of the money going toward the war effort. Parker's first country concert promotion featured Roy Acuff and a young Minnie Pearl, who had only recently joined the Grand Ole Opry. Minnie was touring with Acuff for $50 a week, but she was told to shorten her opening comedy routine. "Howdy, I'm just so proud to be here. I'm so proud I could come." Acuff carefully protected his clean public image after becoming the Opry's first network radio host. So when Minnie's act needed adjusting, he quietly pulled her aside and spoke to her privately. "Minnie, you'll have to leave off that last part. It's just too suggestive." Nash says Minnie Pearl, born Sarah Ophelia Colley, was a college-educated actress from a once prosperous Tennessee family. Even though she created her Minnie Pearl character from her travels through the South, she was surprised by how loose and unorganized the country music business seemed. Minnie remembers, "When I came along, nobody owned their home. They lived in trailers or rooming houses. Nobody had any insurance, and very few of them had bank accounts. They carried all the money they had with them. When one of them got ready to buy a house, the real estate man would say, 'How do you intend to take care of this?' And they'd say, 'Will cash do?' They had no idea how big this thing was going to be." Minnie noticed, though, that Parker was unusually sharp when it came to turning country music into money. For his first country show, he used a grocery store coupon promotion to sell discounted tickets, and it worked well enough to draw big crowds for several performances. She said, "It was the first time we had any connection with anything like that. The store paid for the advertising, and many more tickets were sold because every grocery cashier in a 3-county area was working what amounted to a box office. The man was thinking even then." Roy Acuff shows his success encouraged Parker to push further into country music, even asking Acuff if he could manage him. But Acuff backed away because Parker's reputation and methods seemed too wild for the more proper Grand Ole Opry image. Acuff's sister, Sue, knew Parker's reputation and says, "You don't want the dog catcher." Nash writes, quote, "Acuff, the biggest star on the Opry other than Bill Monroe, saw that Parker was right when he told him he needed to gauge his fee to a percentage of whatever the promoter took in, plus a guarantee. But no one else in country music was doing it, and it just didn't seem the Christian way. Besides, Parker wanted complete control of Acuff's career, which the stony-faced band leader found intolerable." End quote. Parker and Acuff briefly considered working together in Nashville, but Parker immediately pushed for Acuff to leave the Grand Ole Opry and focus on better-paying personal appearances. That idea was too much for Acuff, so the management possibility ended quickly. Parker didn't give up easily, so Acuff tried to let him down gently by allowing him to book some open dates. Acuff also gave him a side opportunity to promote Roy Acuff flour in Florida. That's neat. I wouldn't think of a celebrity to come out with their own brand of flour. Nash writes, quote, "Before they parted, Acuff gave the budding entrepreneur one piece of gold-plated advice: Eddie Arnold. Now, that was a young man to keep an eye on. The smooth-voiced singer was the featured vocalist for Pee Wee King's Golden West Cowboys, and he could charm the warts off a hog's back. It was only a matter of time before a talent like that went solo. Any record company would fall over itself to snag him." End quote. In 1942, Parker's country concert promotions were becoming less about raising money for the Humane Society and more about making money for himself. He started pulling away from shelter work, studying the Nashville business, and paying close attention to Eddie Arnold as someone to watch. He was consciously reshaping his image as he moved into country music. He started dressing more like a Southern character, using a string tie, speaking more folksy, and softening his accent, though a slight lisp remained. When he got nervous, which didn't happen often, traces of his Dutch background slipped through. In those moments, his language sounded caught between Dutch and English, and he would say "me" instead of "I," as in "me got to go now." Whether he meant to do it or not, that speech habit actually helped his image. It made him seem even more like a quirky, small-town Southern character. Parker soon teamed up with established country music promoters J.L. Frank and Oscar Davis. He especially clicked with Davis, who, like Parker, came from the carnival world and had promoted strange attractions before moving into concert promotion. Davis, like Parker, still carried the carnival world with him into country music promotion. Even his slogan, "Don't you dare miss it," sounded like classic carnival hype. Parker saw J.L. Frank as useful on the surface, but he also had a strategic reason for getting close to him. Frank managed Pee Wee King's band, which brought Parker one step closer to Eddie Arnold. By 1942, Parker's life had changed dramatically. In just 2 years, he had gone from being nearly broke to becoming relatively successful and financially stable. His concert promotions became much more than a side hustle. They gave him a way back into show business and helped him build important connections, and it turned out to be more profitable than he expected. He noticed that promoters like J.L. Frank and Oscar Davis understood how much money and opportunity country music could offer. Parker wanted in, and he planned to grab a big piece of that world for himself. But Parker's sudden success brought a serious risk, an IRS audit. For someone living illegally in the U.S. and avoiding federal registration, being called in by the government would have been frightening. Nash writes, quote, "And so Parker approached the IRS situation as he would every other tight spot of his life, with a snow job. He began by putting a false bottom, about 4 inches deep, in the kind of small trunk that show people carried, and then gathered every bill that he could find. Outside the auditor's office, he carefully arranged a wad of paper so that several poked out of the lips of the trunk, and, once inside, dumped the lot on the agent's desk with a ceremonious whoosh. Then, like a magician, he continued to make them appear, from his pockets, his hat, his pants legs, in a dazzling display." End quote. Nash says Parker got extremely lucky during the IRS audit because the agent was badly hung over and had a pounding headache. That made the usually strict auditor much easier for Parker to deal with. Gabe Tucker remembers, "Tom said the guy started pacing back and forth, just holding his head, and Tom told him, 'Hal, let's count them up and see if I owe you something. If I do, me'll pay it, but I can't be up here all week.' It didn't take him long to get out of there, and after all that, he didn't owe a damn thing." Even though Parker got through the audit, the IRS remained one of his deepest fears, and from then on, he would go on to great lengths to avoid anything that might draw tax scrutiny. Nash says Parker had another serious scare in January 1942 when the draft board sent him paperwork for possible military service. Once again, he didn't mention his past Army service, and with Bobby still living at home, he tried to be classified as 3A, meaning deferred because of dependents. The board accepted his claim. Nash writes, quote, "In March 1944, the draft board came calling again, reclassifying Parker as 1A, or available for military service. With that, Parker, whose weight already exceeded that of most healthy males of his height and age group, began piling on food in an effort to have himself reclassified 4F. Soon, with a stack of 3 chins bobbing on a thick stalk of a neck and his great protuberance of a belly expanding from his imposing waist, he swelled to such proportions as to resemble his personal totem, the elephant. But it did the trick." End quote. To people around Parker, he seemed strangely unconcerned during World War II, even about what was happening in Europe or in his native Holland. Meanwhile, Parker's sister, Johanna, was showing his photo to American soldiers in hopes of finding him, while Parker was quietly alive in Tampa, working at the Humane Society and secretly writing to a Dutch soldier near his old hometown of Breda. The Dutch soldier served with the Princess Irene Brigade. Before the war ended, the soldier wrote back with shocking news for Parker. His mother, Maria Ponzi van Kelk, had died, which stunned Parker. In 1961, Parker would tell his brother Ad, "When I heard that mother was dead, for me, Holland was also dead. She was my only real tie to Holland." What about his siblings? Nash writes, quote, "But it wasn't until that late date of 1961 that Andre learned that the sad news from the Dutch soldier had been a tragic misunderstanding. Maria van Kelk had, indeed, lived through the war, but she had also hurled herself into her grief. Surely her son himself had not survived, or he would have sent home some sort of sign. Now she lay under the good earth with an inconsolable heart, never knowing that her Andre was still alive in America, evolving into the someone he promised he would be." End quote. In August 1942, Parker became interested in a man that he thought could help him break further into show business. When a Warner Brothers crew came to Tampa to film Air Force, Parker eagerly helped provide dogs from the Humane Society and used the chance to be around movie people again. Parker demanded, "Who is the head man here?" He was told, "The director is Howard Hawks." And Parker said, "Yes, but who is the very top man?" The response was, "That would be Hal Wallace." Wallace wasn't actually in Florida because he was back in California, but his name stuck with Parker. Nash says Tampa kept attracting movie crews because of its weather and daylight, and it gave Parker more chances to get near Hollywood people. When MGM came to film A Guy Named Joe, Parker again supplied animals from the Humane Society and tried to build connections by inviting the camera crew on a family outing. Nash writes, quote, "Still, he obsessed about Wallace. In the old days, the pickpockets, grifters, and gamblers who traveled by rail often had their victim marked before they ever boarded the train. And so was it with Parker and Wallace. The producer could be his ticket in Hollywood." End quote. Parker was feeling so successful that he made an unusually bold move. Even though he usually tried to get everything free, he left the free Humane Society apartment and moved his family into a ranch-style home in South Tampa at 4218 San Pedro. Parker tried to focus his promotion work on a few Florida cities, especially Orlando, Daytona Beach, and Jacksonville. In Jacksonville, he hired Mae Bourne Axton, a songwriter, for publicity work while presenting himself in the Tampa directory as a, quote, traveling agent. He started running his new promotion business from the San Pedro house and called it Tom Parker's Hillbilly Jamboree. He was already making it look official, even printing business cards for Audie P. Johnson as his, quote, advertising manager for press and radio. In early 1943, Parker booked Pee Wee King and his Golden West Cowboys for a Humane Society benefit in Tampa, then sent them on several weeks of Florida theater dates. Many of those shows used the exhausting bicycle method, where the band played 2 theaters in one night, rushing back and forth between performances while movies played. J.L. Frank had spoken highly of Parker to Pee Wee King, and King quickly saw why. Parker impressed him with his non-stop energy and drive. King said, "Regardless of how big the advance sale was, he always tried harder to get bigger crowds, and he was always very good to the entertainers." Nash says Parker wasn't really interested in the music itself, only in whether an act could sell tickets. He booked Pee Wee King's band partly to please J.L. Frank, but mostly because it gave him a chance to size up Eddie Arnold. He studied Arnold and saw real star potential. Arnold had the look and the voice and the presence Parker thought could possibly lead to big record sales, maybe even a Hollywood film career. But when Arnold left King's band in May, Parker didn't immediately try to manage him. Marie didn't want to move to Nashville, and Parker also worried that J.L. Frank would want to keep Arnold under his own control. Parker and Arnold crossed paths again in the fall of 1943 after Arnold had formed his own band, the Tennessee Plowboys. By then, Arnold was building his own identity, performing live every morning on Nashville's WSM radio for farmers and early risers. He also sometimes appeared on a WSM studio-produced show before the Opry. Parker happened to be a Nashville scouting talent when he heard Eddie Arnold's name promoted on WSM. Recognizing the opportunity, he rushed over to the studio to catch Arnold before he performed on the air. Nash says Parker approached him with his polished, folksy charm, acting as if he had been following Arnold's rise closely. He complimented him, mentioned seeing his magazine profile, hinted they should work together, and then moved straight into his management pitch. Arnold politely listened to Parker's pitch, but told him he was already discussing management with Dean Upson from WSM's Artist Service Bureau. Parker said, "Well, I manage Gene Austin, you know." Nash writes, quote, "Arnold's face lit up, and the Tampa dog catcher knew he'd rolled a lucky 7. Gene Austin had long been one of Eddie's inspirations, and so it was with 2 agendas that Parker took Austin backstage at Nashville's Ryman Auditorium for a Grand Ole Opry performance not long after that meeting with Arnold at WSM. Austin had filed for bankruptcy the previous year, and if Parker could get him on the Opry to do a song or 2, maybe book some club dates out of it, he'd be only too happy to help an old friend. If in the process Parker should just happen to give Eddie Arnold the thrill of his life by introducing him to his hero, well, certainly there'd be no harm in that." End quote. Arnold remembers that when he and Parker seriously discussed management, Parker was direct and blunt. He didn't soften his pitch or dance around what he wanted. He says, "Tom was obviously interested in finding a new young artist. Seemed like he knew what he was talking about, and I was a hungry boy." Parker kept showing up around Nashville and putting himself in Arnold's path, and he was determined to eventually win him over. Nash's Parker's trips to Nashville made him miss life on the road and the rhythm of constant travel. To get back into that world and to better understand country musicians, he became Pee Wee King's road manager for much of 1943. Parker fit right into the long road trips by gambling with the band to pass the time. Pee Wee King remembered him always being ready to play cards or shoot dice, even keeping a $100 bill on hand just in case. After the tour, Parker went to Florida and booked shows for Ernest Tubb. Tubb respected Parker as a strong promoter, but he didn't trust him long term. Tubb told his son Justin, "He'd constantly try to put one over on you. That was the life he led as a carny." Parker understood the value of keeping Tubb close as his career rose. To make a good impression, he gave Tubbs' children 2 ponies, one for Justin and a smaller Shetland with a buckboard for Elaine. The Tubb children were delighted by Parker's pony gifts, not realizing he was also getting rid of old kiddie ride animals. Elaine's pony was both old and blind. Ernest Tubb suspected Parker's generosity wasn't entirely selfless, that he likely wanted the children to enjoy them, but also expected the gifts to give him leverage later. And he was right. WSM had been sending Grand Ole Opry-style tent shows into rural southern areas since 1941, especially for people who couldn't travel easily during the war. Parker wanted in on that world, so he put himself forward as the booker and advance man, aka the general agent, for the April 1944 Jamup&Honey tent show. He was especially drawn to the tent show because it included Eddie Arnold, who was quickly rising at the Opry. With support from Harry Stone and Roy Acuff, Parker landed the job as the show's general agent. The Jamup&Honey tent show opened for a 5-day run in Mobile, Alabama under miserable conditions. Heavy rain soaked the canvas tent and it seeped through and left the ground underneath so flooded it was almost like a river. Gabe Tucker, who was Arnold's bass player at the time, remembers, "We performed barefooted. It was so bad, and God, it rained every day." But the bad weather didn't stop people from coming. Crowds traveled from Mobile and nearby rural areas, willing to spend their wartime money just to see the Grand Ole Opry performed under a tent. People waited for hours in a long, winding line, dressed up in nice clothes despite the cold and rain. Everyone hoped to be one of the 1,500 who could squeeze into the huge tent for the show. Mobile was a meaningful choice for Parker. It wasn't random. As he followed WSM's radio reach and rebuilt his career, he returned to the same city where he likely first entered America in 1929 and began reinventing himself. On the second week, he returned to Mobile to check whether the tent show was living up to his promises to WSM and the show's owner, Lee Davis Honey Wilds. Despite the high daily cost, almost $600 a day, the strategy worked. They targeted small towns without auditoriums, and the shows often sold out with huge crowds still waiting outside. In some small towns, nearly everyone came out. In one Oklahoma town of 1,500 people, about 1,100 packed into the tent, and news of the huge crowds quickly made its way back to Nashville. Pee Wee King remembers, "Even with the tent shows, Tom seemed to know how to put them in the right place at the right time. Some of us would go out on the road in Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama and have rain. And Tom would be in Illinois and Indiana and Iowa, maybe also having rain, but still drawing crowds." Parker promoted the tent show with big, bold posters promising radio stars live in person. He traveled to town in a beat-up yellow panel truck marked with red WSM Grand Ole Opry advertising and helped turn farmers' pastures into packed makeshift showgrounds. Gabe Tucker remembers, "They furnished him that old truck and gave him green stamps for gasoline. He slapped them big posters, the 3 30x60 pictorial sheets, up on the sides of barns with flour and water, and oh God, that truck smelled awful, just sour as hell. And he slept in it every once in a while out there on the road. I felt sorry for him, just like a tramp in them awkward-looking shoes with his britches halfway down him. Marie was in Tampa, and he was so damn lonesome. It was pretty rough living." Parker's work with the tent show gave him exactly what he wanted: more access to Eddie Arnold. Even though Arnold was still under contract with Dean Upson until October 1945, Parker was already preparing his next move. Tucker and little Roy Wiggins remembered Parker standing in the shadows with only the red glow of his cigar revealing he was there. The tent show gave Parker the perfect chance to get close to Arnold over time. He wanted Arnold to trust him and eventually seek his advice, while also impressing everyone around the show with his promotion skills, his money sense, and forceful personality. Nash says Parker was still reinventing himself as a country music promoter, so he wanted to strengthen his reputation and learn the culture better. He understood that if he wanted people to trust him, he first had to make himself popular with them. Thus, Parker kept finding excuses to return to the tent show every week or two. Whether he claimed he was solving a problem or just picking up his pay, the real goal was to stay visible and keep building influence. Gabe Tucker remembers, "He was trying to make friends with everybody that was there because he didn't know who was heavy with power and who wasn't." Parker was jealous of Tucker's closeness to Arnold. Tucker says, "We got along just fine, but back then he could get along with anybody. He was the nicest guy in the world when he needed you." Parker was soon traveling with Uncle Dave Macon, an eccentric banjo-playing Opry star known for drinking whiskey, along with Macon's son Doris, who played guitar with him. One advantage for Parker traveling with the troupe was that he sometimes got to sleep in an actual bed instead of the truck, even if the hotels were, as Honey Wilds called them, little wasps' nests. Nash says Jamup&Honey were comedy performers whose act mixed Southern humor with songs and routines rooted in the old minstrel show tradition, including blackface, which Nash frames as being presented at the time as a tribute, quote, tribute to Black culture. Parker was more attracted to comedy and practical jokes than to traditional rural Southern music, which often focused on sad stories about drinking and heartbreak and unfulfilled dreams. And he enjoyed country comedy because the jokes felt familiar to him. Stories about simple country folks, immigrants, and small-town hayseeds outsmarting city people were similar to the kinds of jokes he would have known from small village life in Holland. Nash writes, quote, whether he realized it, Parker's 6-month excursion in the company of country comedians had a profound effect on his thinking and entrepreneurial style. In years to come, he would often book a comic on his shows, whether the headliner was Hank Snow or Elvis Presley, and even when such opening acts were no longer fashionable or appropriate, end quote. Nash says Parker spent a lot of time bonding with the troupe on the road through meals and stories and walks around town, but when Minnie Pearl tried to get him to talk about his childhood and past, Parker suddenly became quiet. Minnie would say years later, I was with him for months at a stretch, and he never even slipped and mentioned anything about his background. This baffled Minnie. She says, Southern people talk about their grandmother, their great-grandmother, what their daddy did, what their grandfather did. They're involved in background and family. Minnie believed the rumor that Parker was born around Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, but Parker remained mysterious and refused to share any real details about his background. Nash says Parker seemed more comfortable with Honey Wilds than with some of the others, which made sense because Honey owned the show and had hired Parker. But Honey was also a large, intimidating man who was not easy to get close to. Wilds could be hard to deal with offstage. Even though he was a comedian, he was often unpleasant, gloomy, and intimidating. He carried weapons or weapon-like tools, including a pocket knife, a wrench, and sometimes a pistol, which he even fired near people to get their attention. David Wilds, Honey's son, believes his dad and Parker bonded because they respected or enjoyed what the other brought to the show. Each man's style, work, and personality appealed to the other. David says, my father was a total creative rebel. He was a lot like Tom in that he was a very intelligent guy who worked really hard to either dominate a situation through any means necessary or pretend that he wasn't as shrewd as he was. Tom's thought process was just constantly evolving, and Daddy had a tremendous appreciation for his ability to get things done. When the tent show season ended in the fall of 1944, Parker hosted a big dinner for the troupe in Tampa. Members of Arnold's band later felt Parker's generosity was mainly an attempt to impress Arnold, who still had not made up his mind about the man with no education and imperfect English. Nash says Parker already had big plans to turn Eddie Arnold into a major star beyond the Opry, but until he could secure Arnold's management and contract, Parker worked for J.L. Frank as a stump man, which meant doing a mix of promotion, road management, and advance work to keep Frank's performers booked across the South and Midwest. Parker operated more aggressively and resourcefully than many country managers of the time. While others worked from home phones or relied on the Opry switchboard, Parker used the lobby of Nashville's Andrew Jackson Hotel as his makeshift office, taking advantage of the free phones and letter desks to run his business. Jack Kaplan remembers, he used to tell people in New York, call me in my office at 2 o'clock. He'd sit there and wait on it, just so everybody would think he had a big office in Nashville. Parker's main job at that point was managing a large tour for Ernest Tubb, who had become a major country star thanks to Soldier's Last Letter and a couple of quick movies. Tubb was popular enough to headline a touring Opry package that included newer acts like comedian Rob Brassfield and the young sister duo, the Poe sisters, Ruth and Nell. He worked ahead of the tour, usually arriving about 2 weeks before the performers. He handled the practical promotion, booking venues, putting up posters, arranging newspaper ads and hotels, and setting up 15-minute early morning radio spots so the troupe could promote the show locally. At some point, Parker would meet up with Ernest Tubb along the route, often in one of Parker's favorite diners, to brief him on the arrangements. Over big meals like chicken fried steak and sweet tea, Parker would hand Tubb a carefully written schedule of the venues, promotions, and plans he had organized. Afterward, the two men would relax by playing cards or dice together at the table. Gabe Tucker remembers, He'd take a chance on anything. Nash says Parker's image changed when he worked for Joe Frank. Unlike his rough, shabby look during the Jamup&Honey tent show days, Parker now dressed more sharply and professionally, in the kind of clothes that had appealed to him back when he was still Andreas Van Kalk. Nell Poe remembers, he would always wear a white shirt with a nice sport jacket and slacks. He was already heavy-set and balding, but he really looked like a gentleman. He traveled so hard and fast promoting us that he would have a whole suitcase of white shirts, but he wouldn't have time to get them laundered. He'd say, I'm sending them home for my wife to do them. I'll pick them up on the next trip. Parker was especially upbeat on the tub tour and even started inserting himself into the stage act. He dressed up like Smiley Burnett's comic character Frog Milhouse, using a costume with a checked shirt, loose neckerchief, and floppy sideways hat. Nell Poe remembered Parker as being surprisingly convincing in the comic role. He had studied Smiley Burnett closely enough to imitate his movements, expressions, and poses with almost unsettling accuracy. Nell said, as soon as Ernest walked out on stage, Tom would start down the aisle, brushing people's shoulders off with a little broom. He would do that on both sides of the audience. And Ernest would just stop and stand there with his guitar and look through the crowd like he didn't know what was going on. Of course, Ernest couldn't sing because people were just howling at this big commotion of Tom's. He was really hilarious. The positive audience reaction made Parker dream even more about becoming famous himself. Nell adds, he always said to me, I'm going to Hollywood someday. He had big ambitions, and he was sure he was destined for great things. Nash says Parker probably understood that he was unlikely to make it big in Hollywood as a performer himself, and that his better path was to achieve that success through managing someone else, especially Eddie Arnold, who Parker kept watching closely as his career grew, including his new high-profile hosting spot on the Opry's Checkerboard Square segment. As Arnold started attracting interest from national advertisers, Parker worked to get closer to him professionally. He teamed with promoter Jim Bullitt and helped book Arnold for 2 weeks of theater appearances in Florida during the winter of 1944 through 45. Parker wanted to prove to Arnold that he could elevate his career beyond small county fairs and casual fan access. Parker's vision was to book Arnold into bigger, more prestigious venues and control how close fans could get to him. By exciting the crowd while also making the star seem unreachable, Parker believed he could make Arnold appear larger than life, almost godlike. Parker finally secured a handshake agreement in fall of 1945 to represent Arnold exclusively. But what drew Parker to Arnold was not mainly his voice, his baritone, or his yodeling style. It was likely the bigger commercial potential Parker saw in him. Nash writes, quote, with the understanding that Parker would take 25% of Arnold's income and Eddie would pay the expenses, Parker was not even overly concerned with the money he hoped to realize in bringing Eddie to prominence, although his funds were so tight that Marie had to temporarily hawk her wedding ring to finance his trip to Tennessee. For him, the chance to couple his fate to Eddie's was a matter of personal power, of showing folks how to play the game, end quote. Nash says Parker was once again willing to do whatever promotion required. Joey Hoffman remembered seeing Parker personally handing out photos near the grandstand at the Tampa Fairgrounds to draw attention to Arnold's show. Parker would say, it's free today, but the next time you see this face, you'll be paying for it. Parker's boldest promotion came on the day of Arnold's show. He walked into a live radio broadcast at a grocery store opening, asked the band if they knew Eddie's song, Mommy, Please Stay Home With Me. And when they admitted they did not, Parker used the moment to invite both the band and the radio audience to come hear Eddie perform it at the fair, essentially getting free advertising on the air. Eddie Arnold remembers, he was a ball of fire. He worked hard. He got up early and he was a non-drinker. He had a lot of energy. Actually, he was good at everything. He understood business. He was good with the record company and he was good with the personal appearances. He was absolutely dedicated to the personality that he represented. Nash says Parker promoted Arnold in a much more hands-on way than other managers. Instead of working from an office, he traveled the country for months setting up tours himself, often with a companion along, either Bitsy Mott or Bevo Beavis. He pulled a trailer covered with Arnold's image and packed with posters, signs, photos, and banners, and used it like a mobile advertising machine to announce that Eddie Arnold, the Tennessee plowboy, was coming to town. Gabe Tucker says, when he was setting up a tour, he tried to get enough money from whoever was promoting it, and hell, he would go back to the same places sometimes 2 or 3 times if it was necessary, making sure folks knowed Eddie was a-comin'. And he'd tell the promoter, put it on the radio. My boy can't draw people if they don't know he's going to be here. See? He would work on it and stay on it. That's one reason Eddie got in the bracket that he did, because Tommy worked his ass off. If he was awake, he was preaching Eddie Arnold to anybody that'd listen. Parker relied on his old carnival connections to help promote Arnold. When he needed favors, especially to get Arnold's early records heard, he returned to the carnival world where performers and operators treated him like one of their own and played Arnold's songs over their loudspeakers. The carnival people affectionately saw Eddie Arnold as Tommy's boy and supported him because of Parker. But Eddie was embarrassed with the flashy carnival promotion and soon got tired of making side trips on tour just to thank carnival managers for playing and selling his records. Parker would drag Arnold on late night detours to visit the carnival contacts, saying, "We got somebody up at this turnoff we need to go see." Arnold came to dread these awkward visits, especially when they meant driving into the middle of nowhere to meet rough carnival figures, and he eventually started complaining about it. "Tom, do I have to? Do I have to?" Nash says Arnold was not the only one frustrated by Parker's management style. Parker quickly expanded his touring territory beyond the South and Southwest, sending the band and the opening act Lonzo and Oscar as far north as Pennsylvania. He also increased the workload, booking so many dates that the performers were often playing 5 nights a week, driving overnight to get back to the Opry on Saturday, and then leaving again on Sunday. Steel guitarist Little Roy Wiggins remembers, "It was really too much. I told Parker he was queer for that white line in the middle of the highway because he just had to run up and down that road like crazy." Parker was careful and tough when it came to money. After booking Arnold at a Chattanooga auditorium with a promoter known for not paying performers, Parker protected himself by getting half the fee up front and planning to collect the rest in cash before Eddie went on stage. Eddie Arnold remembers, "Tom came backstage while the musicians were standing there strumming their guitars waiting. And he said to me, 'Don't you hit a lick until I go,' and then waves his hand. That would mean he had gotten the money. Well, he went to this gentleman, the promoter, and he said, 'You know, those singers, they're funny. They won't sing a note unless I wave my hand.' A couple of minutes later, I peeped through the curtain and he waved at me, and we did the show." Even though Arnold had status as an RCA Victor artist and Grand Ole Opry member, his career with Parker still started small. Playing a city auditorium would have once seemed impossible because some of the early tour stops were in tiny remote Texas towns where the show was literally performed in a barn. Bitsy Mott remembers, "We used to play all those places and sometimes you had to kick the debris out of your way before you could let people come in. Cows had been in there, you know. We set up wooden benches and it was $1 a ticket, sit where you like." I used to hear him say that all the time. The early tours were exciting learning experiences for the young performers. Parker was also developing his own business persona. He made a point of carrying a fresh cigar so that during negotiations he could light it, puff on it, and it would buy him time to come up with answers when the questions came. Nash writes, quote, "Parker's habit of seeing how much he could get for as little as he could give reached new heights of audacity as Eddie's career heated up. The manager found it increasingly necessary to remain in Nashville when the group came in off the road. As he had done from the beginning, Parker took it for granted that he was welcome to stay with Eddie and his wife, Sally, a Kentucky girl whom Arnold married in late 1941 while performing with Pee Wee King." End quote. The Arnolds wanted to keep their home life separate from business, but Parker blurred those boundaries. After one house guest had already felt like enough, Parker brought in Bevo, whom he promoted as Arnold's tour manager, along with Marie, who seemed cold towards the wives in the circle. Soon, Bobby Ross also arrived from Tampa to apprentice under Parker and moved in too. The 4 of them would stay at the house for a few days and sometimes up to a month. Nash writes, quote, "This parasitic arrangement fit the pattern of Parker's freeloading days of old and seemed not to bother the thrifty Dutchman in the slightest, no matter who it inconvenienced. Eddie and Sally had recently bought a 5-room red brick bungalow in Madison, about 7 miles west of downtown Nashville. But since Eddie's mother, Georgia, often lived there too, and the couple welcomed the birth of daughter Joanne in December 1945, the house was full." End quote. Sally Arnold clearly remained annoyed by Parker's intrusion 50 years later, though she was too polite to say much. Eddie Arnold initially stayed calm, but Parker pushed things further by taking over Arnold's rented office space, blurring professional boundaries even more. Gabe Tucker remembers, "Tommy told him, 'Plowboy, you need a place where you can store all of your songbooks.' And hell, he just dropped the shuck on him then. Eddie paid for the whole thing and Tommy had a bigger office than Eddie did and never paid a nickel on it. Eddie started to say something to him about it and Tommy said, 'Well, me taking care of you. Give me a better place to do it.' He never paid for office space, nowhere in his whole life." Nash says this long, irritating stay with the Parkers became the breaking point that led Eddie to say or do something that prompted one of Parker's most famous remarks. Arnold wrote in his biography, "I said to him once when he was managing me, 'Tom, "Why don't you get yourself a hobby? Play golf, go boating or something." He looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're my hobby." The Arnolds finally got some relief from Parker's constant presence when he bought his own nearby home on Gallatin Road in Madison. Nash says that by the time Parker became Arnold's manager, Arnold was already beginning to prove himself as a major artist. His song, "Each Minute Seems a Million Years," had become an important early hit, reaching number 5 on Billboard's folk music sales chart. Arnold needed more than one early hit to build a lasting career. He needed a strong, coordinated team behind him. RCA's Steve Scholes was already helping from the record company side, but Parker positioned himself as the leader of that team, using Eddie's rise to advance his own power in the music business. Nash writes, quote, "Eventually, he would bring all the players to the group that would later figure so heavily in taking Elvis to the top, most prominently Hill and Range music publishers Gene and Julian Aberbach and Harry Kalkheim and Abe Lasvogel of the powerful William Morris Agency. Nearly every major career move he guided for Arnold, a string of chart-topping records, the judicious use of early television, a foray into Hollywood movies, and even engagements in Las Vegas served as the blueprint for Parker's plan with Elvis," end quote. Parker immediately used Arnold's career to build his own influence too. He created a pattern he would later repeat, keeping the artist separated from the record company so Parker could act as the necessary middleman. By controlling communication and deal details, he made himself more powerful while limiting what his client fully understood. He also wanted the music industry to see him as almost as important as Eddie Arnold himself. To build that image, he made sure his own name appeared prominently in ads, often nearly as large as Arnold's, emphasizing that Arnold was under exclusive management of Thomas A. Parker. Parker wanted people to see him and Arnold as a powerful team, not just artist and manager. He was also carefully promoting himself as an important deal maker who deserved recognition. Even his formal studio portraits, showing him smiling in an expensive pinstripe suit, were part of building that self-made image. He signed them the Gov. Okay, that's weird. In October 1948, Parker saw a chance to upgrade his public image with a more impressive title. While in Baton Rouge with Gabe Tucker, he visited an old carnival contact, Bob Greer, who was working for Louisiana Governor Jimmy Davis, a former country singer famous for "You Are My Sunshine." Nash writes, quote, "Parker and Greer carried on about their old shenanigans, cutting up jackpots in the Carney vernacular, and Tucker, amused by Parker's outrageous stories of the showman's swindle, declared that anyone who could snow with such velocity should have a title, and put the request to Greer. Thrilled at the prospects of such an inspired con, Parker refused to leave town until the document, which commissioned him as a Louisiana colonel, with all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities thereunto appertaining, was in his hands," end quote. Up until then, Parker had the members of Eddie Arnold's band call him Popsy. It was a calculated nickname meant to create a fake sense of closeness, making it easier for Parker to charm people and get favors from them. "You like your room? Buy Popsy a cigar." But now, things were different. Tucker says, "He turned around and said, 'In the future, Mr. Tucker, you will make sure that everybody addresses me as Colonel.'" And thus Parker, who had deserted the army, now carried the title Colonel, a title many people assumed had military meaning even though it did not come from military service. Okay, see, that's why I personally will never refer to Tom Parker as the Colonel, because he didn't earn it, and it's an insult to American service members everywhere by addressing him as such. Ugh. Nash says Parker became extremely controlling during his early years managing Eddie Arnold. He fought theater managers over concession rights and took over the money Arnold's band had previously shared from songbook sales. Instead, Parker kept that income within his own circle, sending Bitsy and Bevo into the audience to sell books, photos, and programs while Marie handled sales from a lobby table. Bob McCluskey, a former general promotion manager for RCA Victor, said, "The specter of Tom selling pictures and records down the aisles of a venue was one to behold. That, to my knowledge, no pop manager had ever done." Parker's controlling behavior deeply bothered Little Roy Wiggins and others in Eddie Arnold's band. Parker seemed to enjoy creating tension among band members who had previously gotten along well. Over time, they realized he used conflict as a way to stay in control. Everyone would come to him to solve problems, making him the great fixer, while also giving him inside information about everything happening around Arnold. Nash writes, quote, "When Eddie told Parker that Wiggins was irate at the loss of $100 a week in songbook commissions and intimated he might quit, Parker sent the message that he didn't care what Little Roy did. Coinel, as Wiggins mocked the way Parker pronounced his new title and his inability to say R's, had decided that's the way it was going to be, end quote. Tensions around Parker's management style were starting to boil over. The breaking point came one night in El Paso after Arnold performed at a private party. Little Roy Wiggins, having a beer afterward, headed toward the bus that was supposed to take the group back to the hotel. One of Parker's staff asked, "Where do you think you're going with that beer in your hand? You're not getting on this bus with that beer." Wiggins, who was 5 feet tall, said, "Just who in the hell says I'm not?" The staffer told him, "The colonel says you're not." Wiggins replied angrily, "Well, F the colonel." Then he walked away and told Eddie Arnold what happened, saying, "I'll kill that big, fat, sloppy mother." Arnold tried to calm him down and admitted Parker had been wrong and promised to talk to him the next day. But later at the hotel, Wiggins became angry again, especially after being encouraged by Vic Willis, a featured act on the show. He started thinking about all the ways Parker had hurt the band financially, pushing Eddie to put them on salary instead of a percentage and cutting them out of record royalties Eddie had originally promised them. He couldn't take it any longer, so he called Parker himself. Wiggins remembers, "It's one of the things I am proudest of in my life. I cussed him for 30 minutes, at least 30 minutes, until, well, he got to crying, really." Parker, in tears, tried to explain the beer by saying, "Don't you know about insurance?" Wiggins told him, "Don't run that snowplow at me. I ain't driving that damn bus." The tension between the two became so bad that they avoided each other completely for 3 days. Then, by chance, Wiggins was on the hotel elevator when it stopped on Parker's floor, and there he was. Parker said to him, "Roy, I want to talk to you. Everything's all right between me and you, except one thing. Did you say F the colonel?" Wiggins remembers, "I had embarrassed him in front of his flunkies. I think that really got through to him." Nash says Parker's hunger for control only grew as he became more successful. He came to see himself as superior to almost everyone, including RCA executives, and used nearly Machiavellian tactics to maintain authority. This pattern began with Eddie Arnold, whom he helped make the top-selling country artist, and later became even more pronounced with Elvis. Parker didn't view his actions as manipulative or unethical. In his mind, he was simply taking full advantage of every opportunity to make Eddie Arnold more successful and to increase his own power and profit at the same time. One of Parker's first major business tests came in dealing with Gene and Julian Aberbach, who became important figures in Eddie Arnold's career. The Aberbach brothers had immigrated from Europe and founded Hill and Range Songs in 1944, focusing on country and Western publishing at a time when many New York publishers saw little value in that music. By the end of 1945, their instincts had paid off. They had 3 hit songs on the charts and $50,000 in the bank. That's approximately $930,000 in today's money. The Aberbach brothers quickly recognized Arnold's potential after seeing other publishers benefit when he recorded their songs. They wanted to secure influence with him early, hoping he would choose material from their catalog. So before Arnold's 1946 recording session, they met with Arnold, Parker, and RCA's Steve Sholes to pitch songs and possibly make a publishing arrangement. The Aberbach brothers were polished and strategic businessmen. Their refined European manners, sharp dress, and sophistication impressed some people and made others suspicious, but they knew how to offer the right incentives to persuade record executives and artists and managers to work with them. Before Arnold's first recording session of 1946, the Aberbachs offered him a $20,000 check. It was a large sum at the time, but it was also a calculated investment because they expected to gain valuable control or influence over Arnold's song choices in return. Julian Aberbach says, "It was really for nothing, you see. We promised Eddie that every good song that we had, we would submit to him first before we went to any other artist. Then we tried to get the best songs that we had that would fit Eddie Arnold." The Aberbach's investment quickly paid off. Starting with Arnold's March 1946 session, Hill and Range songs became a regular part of his recordings. One of them, "Chained to a Memory," reached number 3 on Billboard, and for a while, many of Arnold's most important releases came from Hill and Range's catalog. Bob McCluskey believed producer Steve Sholes was likely receiving secret payments or benefits despite his respectable family man image. McCluskey also believed Parker understood Sholes' weakness and knew how to use other people's greed to his advantage. McCluskey said, "If Eddie got the 20 grand, what do you think Sholes got? They obviously owed their soul to Hill and Range after taking the money. Once it's in your pocket, there is no turning back because they have you and they can talk." According to Aberbach, Parker, as Arnold's manager, received 25% of Eddie's $20,000, saying it was More than justified, because he had only one artist. He always had a deal, and he was without any doubt an excellent deal maker and skilled negotiator. But he was honest. Nash writes, quote, honesty, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. As the Aberbach's cousin music publisher Freddie Beanstalk points out, Parker always had side deals too, and especially with RCA Victor, where in a very real sense, he was the client, not Eddie Arnold, and later, not even Elvis Presley. From the beginning of his association with the label, it was obvious to Parker that there was plenty of money to go around, especially for the man who had the gumption to speak up and demand it, a man whose key to survival, as Gabe Tucker asserts, was always to have something better than a contract, maybe a little something to remind a guy about when the circumstance demanded. End quote. Eddie Arnold appreciated the huge success Parker helped bring him. By 1952, Arnold had risen far beyond his Opry roots and had his own network television show. But even with that success, Arnold was uncomfortable with parts of Parker's flashy, overbearing management style. Parker's control over Arnold became suffocating. Parker boasted that Arnold barely had to handle anything for himself, saying, "All Eddie takes care of is his toothbrush and his drawers." But Arnold grew frustrated with that level of control. They also disagreed over Arnold's image and music, as Arnold wanted to move beyond the Tennessee Plowboy label into a more polished style. And he was often embarrassed by Parker's sloppy appearance and loud bragging. Parker would ask him in a crowded elevator, "Which one of our planes did you come down in today?" Arnold also hated the carnival-style publicity stunts like using an elephant to promote his shows in Nashville. But he was especially bothered by the idea that Parker was giving attention to other artists while still taking a large percentage from him. Some rumors about Parker's connection to the Had a Call caravan were likely false, but Parker really was working with Hank Snow and Tommy Sands through Jamboree attractions. To Arnold, that felt like a betrayal because he believed his 25% fee bought Parker's exclusivity. This growing resentment eventually led to a public clash in Las Vegas in 1953. Nash writes, quote, according to Roy Wiggins, Eddie, then playing the Sahara Hotel, was alone in his room when the phone rang, and the caller, thinking he had Tom Diskin, Parker's new lieutenant, on the line, said, "Tell the Colonel that the show we got together with Hank Snow was doing okay." Arnold, angry and shaken, went down to the coffee shop to confront the Colonel and saw him hide something under the table. Parker would later claim it was an ad he had taken out to surprise his client as he approached. An argument ensued outside, and by the time I walked up, remembers Wiggins, they were at it pretty good. Eddie drew back his fist. "Don't hit him," yelled a frightened Marie Parker, and the singer later sent a telegram that informed his manager he was no longer in need of his services. End quote. Eddie Arnold's firing of Parker devastated him. Parker felt humiliated and emotionally wounded, and the stress was so severe that he soon suffered his first heart attack. Although he lost a lot of weight during recovery, he kept the illness mostly secret because he feared other performers like Hank Snow, Rod Brasfield, Mother Maybelle, and the Carter sisters might lose confidence in him and leave. Worse, he was afraid he would lose his influence at RCA. Steve Scholes had shifted toward Arnold, which left Parker feeling disrespected and pushed aside. Gabe Tucker remembers that Scholes treated him like a flea-bitten alley dog, and him and Scholes was never the greatest of friends after that. To regain power, Parker pressured Scholes and RCA's Bill Bullock, whom some thought was the Colonel's guy, to let him manage the upcoming RCA Victor Country Caravan, which was a touring package of RCA country artists headed by Hank Snow. Nash writes, quote, set for spring of '54, the Caravan was the brainchild of Bob McCluskey, who'd gotten $50,000 allocated for it and was now being pressured to involve Parker. McCluskey said that the Colonel could help with some of the dates, but he didn't want him in control of the money, as he'd already gotten a reputation that was quite unsavory, and I was responsible for all that dough. The next thing McCluskey knew, he was out of a job and Parker was in charge of the venture. End quote. McCluskey remembers, he got the money up front and I was told that the money he didn't spend was his, as no one would ask for it to be returned. Then Parker tried to rebuild and expand his influence in Hollywood with the William Morris office. Even though Arnold's earlier B westerns for Columbia had been poor, Parker still wanted power in the movie business similar to what he had in music. To look the part of a Hollywood operator, he stayed for long stretches at the Hotel Knickerbocker and worked on strengthening his connection with the William Morris office. Parker kept thinking about an incident from his first New York trip to meet Harry Kalkheim at William Morris. On the flight, Parker met a man who boasted about landing a major William Morris deal. When they arrived, that man was greeted with a chauffeured black limousine while Parker had to take the bus. A few days later, Parker was having breakfast at the hotel when he looked out the window. The man who had arrived in New York like a VIP with a limousine was now sitting on his suitcase outside the hotel, waiting for a bus himself. Parker asked, "Where's your limo?" The man said, "The deal fell through." Parker never forgot it, and it served as a harsh reminder of a very real truth. The minute you no longer had something the power brokers wanted, you were out. Byron Raphael said, "As the last of the carnies to really make it in Hollywood, the Colonel was extremely jealous of the very well-bred Jewish guys at William Morris. He resented them, and yet he also needed their respect. So although he made fun of the fact that he was accepted by what he considered to be the cream of New York and Hollywood, secretly he desired it terribly." Parker eventually worked out a deal to handle some of Eddie Arnold's bookings, partly so he would not look powerless in front of the William Morris agency. But before that happened, Parker found consolation in a different way. He called Arnold and said, "Plowboy, we've got to talk. You sent me this wire that said we was through, but you never said nothing about settling up." He knew Arnold didn't like being called Plowboy. Arnold asked, "What do you mean?" Parker said, "Well, if you're not happy with me and you don't want to be associating with me anymore, then it's going to cost you $50,000. Arnold was conservative, especially with money, and he pushed back against Parker by reminding him that their arrangement had never been formalized in a written contract. It had only been a gentleman's agreement. Parker said, "No, Plowboy, there's more to it than that." Then they made arrangements to meet in Nashville with Arnold's attorney, Bill Carpenter. Nash writes, quote, "On the day of the appointment, Parker arrived at Carpenter's office with an old leather bag stuffed full of papers, which he emptied into a small mountain on the lawyer's desk, the IRS trick redone. As the lawyer began sifting through the pile, Parker took a folded paper from his pocket and started reading aloud from the last contract he'd negotiated for Arnold with RCA, one that gave the singer 5 cents a record, the largest royalty rate possible, equal to that of Perry Como. Furthermore, Parker explained, the most favored nation clause dictated that if anybody negotiated a higher royalty rate in the future, Eddie got that too. The agreement was good for 7 years, Parker reminded them, and it carried his signature, not Eddie's. Now, didn't $50,000 seem reasonable, stacked against 25% of whatever royalties Arnold made for the remainder of those 7 years? The singer sank deep in his chair, end quote. Bill Carpenter looked at Arnold and said flatly, "Eddie, pay him." Parker had once avoided formal contracts, but over time he became very good at using contracts as tools of power. Country star Marty Robbins remembers, "Colonel Tom got me out of a contract one time that I didn't want to be in. He did it as a favor. I was really hung up bad. Colonel Tom said, 'Do you want out of that contract?' I said, 'Yes, sir.' And sure enough, he got me out. I would have been hung up for 6 years at a big percent." Robbins later declined to formally sign with Parker's Jamboree Attractions, but still promised to work with Parker whenever needed. To Parker, that kind of informal loyalty was ideal, an unwritten contract. Hank Snow unfortunately learned how crafty and dangerous Parker had become in business. Snow had partnered with Parker in Jamboree Attractions, which booked tours for major acts including Bill Haley, Andy Griffith, and Elvis. In early 1956, Parker returned from Memphis with 2 contracts in his pocket. Nash writes, quote, "The purpose of the trip had been to sign 21-year-old Presley to a management deal. Gladys Presley distrusted the Colonel from the beginning, and Parker had called in Snow, one of her favorite singers, to sweet-talk Elvis's mother into giving her approval. Now, if on the advice of his mother, Elvis balked at the first contract, which Parker carried in his left coat pocket, he had another one ready in his right. What Snow didn't learn until later was that the only difference in the contracts was that one bound Presley to Hank Snow Enterprises Jamboree Attractions, and the other strictly to Parker as the sole and exclusive advisor, personal representative, and manager in any and all fields of public and private entertainment. It was the latter contract that Presley signed, forever cutting Snow out of the most lucrative deal in all of show business." End quote. That's it for Chapter 9. Stay tuned for Chapter 10, which is titled The Man in the Shadows. See you then.